Open the book, my friend. Let's dive in once again. Fill the pages with your hands. Let's talk until we understand. Chapter 1, here we go. Stories flourish and they grow. Lost in words, a world unfolds. Let's get ready for the show. Pages turning late at night. Words we ponder in soft light. Conversations deep and free. On this podcast, just you and me.
Welcome to episode 3 of the 2024 Academic Summer Podcast Series, delving into solar storms by Linda Hogan. I am your host, Jared Stewart. We thank you for listening and hope this series helps you prepare for upcoming competitions. This episode will focus on the final chapters of Solar Storms. With chapter 15, Bush begins attending meetings, and we get the first appearance of Hannah. We are also given more about Tulip and his home. Chapter 16 predominantly focuses on the death of Hannah and the introduction of Aurora. Pay attention how Angel cares for her mother, in much the same way Agnes cared for Dora Rouge. Chapter 17 talks about the nature of Aurora and her heritage and who she favors. From here, we get the upping of conflict between the contractors and those protesting the dams. We see electricity arrive in trains and crews with the continued struggle of Angela and her family to make progress and inform others. Through the rest of the chapters, the threat and violence increases until Angela is forced to flee with the baby. Then we get to the end resolution, which we talked about with our wonderful experts. We hope you enjoy. Welcome to episode 3 of our summer podcast series on the academic novel Solar Storms by Linda Hogan. This is our third and final episode. I am your summer host, Jared Stewart, the Region 9 coordinator and academic social media guru. And joining me again today are J.S. Khan and Yusra Islama, who are both from the English department of the University of North Texas. And I think I described them in the very first intro as brilliant. And I hope over the last 2 episodes and this one, you have seen just how brilliant and insightful they are digging through this book. And so I'm so glad that both of you are back with us one last time to share your thoughts on solar storms. Welcome again to you both, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so let's dive right into the end of the book and right into Hannah and her role in the story, kind of past and present. Like, how does, and this is a little touching on the student question, so I'll try to move us a little off of that. Hannah. I'm sorry. I was about to talk about Angela. My fault. Let's talk about Hannah and her role in the story. I know we talked a little bit about her in episode 1, but now that we're at the end of the book, let's talk about Hannah, but also Aurora, and the connection between those two and Angela and kind of this little mother and 2 half-sister family that we have.
Yeah. Well, this is the moment we've been waiting for to some degree, right? One of them, the final, confrontation, or the confrontation between Angel and Hannah. I think I found it. I think probably other readers would too. I'm curious what y'all think, but I certainly found Hannah, after all the stories, right? Her being equated with the storm, how she seemed to personify this just living pain, right? And loss, which, these indigenous people have experienced. When we finally meet her, of course, she seems so human. And she almost, and maybe this is the point, doesn't, she didn't seem to live up to those expectations, possibly. For me.
It's an anticlimactic meeting, right? Like
to some degree. Yeah, absolutely. Right. What do you think, Yosra?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that the encounter is a little anticlimactic. I do think that we see there are different interpretation from the beginning of what Hannah is. there is the question of what is she, not, who is she?
Yeah, totally.
And most of the people seem to believe that she's some kind of like an evil creature or possessed by some evil spirit or something, or like the
Or that she
incarnation
has
of
like a soul
evil.
sickness, I think they say too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and whereas Bush seems to be convinced that somehow she's like possessed by the history of, or like she's the embodiment of, the history of oppression uh, at the hand of the white man. Uh, but they all come to the same conclusion that she cannot be redeemed. Even Bush, at first, she thinks that there something could be done, but then she gives up on her. And then we see Angela keep
It's both. It's Angela, but they call her Angel, which
yeah,
I think is a nice commentary on the
yeah.
old name she had versus the new name we've given her. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not clear what Angela believes, uh, but she her desire to heal from the trauma, from the generational trauma inflicted on her by her mom and by, mother's mom and the people who abused both those women, leads her to, want to show compassion towards Hannah in the final moments. Um, I'm not really sure what we're supposed to make of that.
Yeah. Well, it's I mean, I can't imagine any child not wanting to know their parent. I mean, I'm sure, right? There's always exceptions, but we know from all of Bush's stories that this is not going to be a happy encounter. And even though it does seem anticlimactic, it does seem necessary because I think it's necessary for Angel to feel empowered, right?
Yeah.
When they first meet, she's looking in her face. It keeps saying, like Bush traveling north, I wanted a map, something fixed, a road in. I wanted to see what was between this woman and me, a landmark, a bond. I'd imagined this meeting so many times, but none of them was like this. Dot, dot, dot. She was, as Bush said, a wall, a place to go with no foundation. And then, of course, going on just a little bit more, there's this line, I realized that she feared me more than I'd ever feared her. So there is that reversal, right?
Mhm.
And we see the mother, Hannah, just intentionally saying awful things to her, right? You
Yeah.
look fat or something, things like that. In these, I think, overt attempts to, keep distance between them. But in those moments, I think we have to see that she is just human, right? And that she's frail and that this life that she's lived so rootless
Mhm.
has taken a real toll on her.
I think the moment that I found probably most interesting was when she says, "I didn't lay a hand on you,"
Right.
and you immediately go to, well, no, your hand did not physically touch her, but that's not the only way you can hurt someone or damage them. Um, which I think is a wonderful parallel to the wider story of damage that's being done from
Right.
very far away, where no, I didn't lay a hand on you, but I have hurt you, both physically, scarring her, and emotionally and psychologically. Um, so it was a nice move by Hogan at that moment to kind of
But
say, have her say something really kind of evil.
Yeah.
it's also in keeping with her character because when she was much younger and she appeared on Adams, one of the things that she started doing was to steal clothes and steal things from other people. And every time
Yeah,
Bush confronted her or anyone confronted her, she would deny it, and with such confidence she would say,
yeah,
"No, I didn't do it." Um, and so yeah, she graduated from shoplifting to physical abuse, and uh, she still cannot acknowledge her wrongdoing.
yeah. And if we're taking the kind of demon imagery or the soul sickness imagery as mental health, then she probably has some very serious mental health issues that she may believe that she did, and so there again, you get that, again, a rootlessness, not just from a physical place, but also from reality. And
Yeah.
which I think is really interesting. Kind of, I mean, again, Hannah does not appear for most of the novel, but for these very brief moments. But there's a lot packed into those few moments that you could probably write a wonderful paper on about
Yeah.
Hannah. So.
It's interesting too how, okay, so she has the dream after the initial encounter. There's this premonition or sense that she is dying even before she gets there. She's dying. But we see Angel mothering her in the same sense that we also saw Agnes mothering her mother, right?
Yeah.
Tor Rouge to some degree.
Yeah.
And, that in itself thematically is interesting. Aurora, I didn't see that coming until it happened. But, that touched back on, there was the other half sister that she had as well, right? That she found in the foster homes and who cut herself.
Yes. Forgot
Yeah.
about that. Yeah.
So we get the sense of, yes, I mean, obviously, this is a different sister. They're different people in real life. But in a story, right, there's a sense of a redemptive arc, maybe possibly the idea that she's going to take care of this sister in a way that she couldn't the other, and become a surrogate mother to her too. So I'm all for Aurora. I thought she was a welcome addition to the crew.
Well, she offers a potential for hope that really none of the other characters fully have. Like I think Angel does, but the rest of them are towards the end of their life. They're and whereas Aurora does offer a little bit of hope if she can be raised within the family that Angela didn't even have. So
that's the light in the darkness.
Yeah,
Aurora. Yeah.
Thank you for making that very obvious. Again, going back to this idea that there's sometimes so many very in-your-face things about this book that you miss the little small ones like Aurora that just never occurred to me until just then. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah. I mean, as we were recording earlier, I realized that Agnes is Latin for lamb, right? She goes from being a bear to the lamb led to the slaughter, so to speak.
Yeah.
But
and I think, sorry.
No, go for it.
No, go.
I think that I keep thinking about the underwhelming encounter, or how anticlimactic the encounter with Hannah is. And I think perhaps it's a way to signal that what Angela believed to be the beginning of her story is not really the beginning of her story, because more than once in the novel she comments on the importance of beginnings, especially how important beginnings are for indigenous culture, and how Bush, in trying to explain to Angela where she comes from and who she is, she's struggling to decide where is the starting point. And perhaps for a while, Angela, I believe that the starting point for her is how she got the scar, her mother, and how she got the scar. And then when we find out about how she got the scar and who her mother is, and she encounters her mother, it doesn't feel as important anymore. It feels very underwhelming, and and it's a way to see, it's a way for Angela herself to see that that's not your beginning. That's not how your story starts or where it starts.
Yeah, I mean, she's already went on this just incredibly arduous journey. She's been carrying her great grandmother for miles on end. I have no idea how many miles they crossed, but there's the harrowing waterfall scene or whatever when they're going. I mean, there's so many things that she goes through, and then of course, even before Hannah's death, we had Agnes's death, which clearly affected Angel. I think I don't know. I mean, maybe you guys would disagree, but it seemed like Agnes. This is more to mourn. Right. Whereas with Hannah's passing, there is a certain maybe closure she arrives at, right? But then also a new opening, right? The possibility for another family member that isn't a wall, right? With nowhere to go. And that's good. It's the one thing Hannah could give her, maybe.
Yeah. A purpose. So about the ending, I don't really want to belabor the ending too much. And again, if you're listening to this, you should have already read the book, so I don't want to hear anything about spoiler alerts. What do we think about the ending as a piece of fiction, but also as reality, as you know, as making sense? What are your thoughts about how Hogan wraps all this up at the end?
So we're going to talk about we're either shipping Tommy and Angel in the parlance of the times, or are we no Romo? I'll say that for me personally, the romance with Tommy seemed inevitable. Do I like, I tend to like books where maybe they're not the happiest endings. It's a personal preference. But after all the awful things, right, that Angels experienced, I mean, ultimately Bush fails in her task to preserve the land, and yet stubbornly goes on. I really did like the Spider Island stuff, right? So those moments near the end, yeah, where they're having to kind of like untie the island and let it go, and they return, and everything's flooded. Obviously, we've already talked on this, right? She goes and sees Dora Rouge before she passes and everything, but it's not like it's very bittersweet, but at the same time, I mean, it's a historical novel, right? As much as that might like push against me because I'm getting older and it's only in the 70s, but still, like, there's no way to stop the government and these contractors. They seem like they almost seem like a natural force themselves, right? So for her to end up with Tommy, for her to still be staying with Bush and have her, as a mother, I thought that was fine. I thought that was good.
Yosser, your thoughts on the ending, how Hogan wraps all this up?
Yeah, I didn't feel like, even though she reconnects with Tommy, I didn't feel like that was an important part of the ending. For some
It felt
reason
kind
in
of
this book,
inevitable.
it felt like all the romance, and there's a lot of couples in this book, but it felt like all of the romance was peripheral. It was just something that happens while other more important things are happening. But I do think that the reemergence of LaRue as a character, and the changes that he undergoes are important because he is I mean, in the beginning of the novel, he embodies, or like he represents the indigenous person who becomes alienated from his culture and who, um, engages in practices that the community doesn't or frowns upon. But then we see him reconnected a little bit more later with a more compassionate side of himself. And Bush is, recognizes the change in him, and there's a little bit of hope that something might happen between them. But I think like the ending is, I there isn't really much that's happening in the ending, but I do think that it's significant that it happens with it ends, sorry, with an interaction between um Angela and Bush. And even though Angela is, voicing something confidently, she's saying there's a wonderful thing inside me. We can still feel like Bush is still in the mentor's position here. She's still like she's validating what Angela thinks, and she says, yes, that's how uh the early people knew this, and that's why they painted. And so she's still teaching her a lot about her culture. And so in a way, I feel like the ending signals that her learning about her culture and the practices of her is still ongoing.
Yeah. Can I add something real quick? I don't have much time.
Go.
But no, like I love those points. And to get back to some of the things we said earlier, right, the early people knew this. That's why they painted animals on the inside of the case. They still had to paint. See, there's something contradictory in that, right? There's something wonderful that lives inside me, and yet they paint an animal, right, which is not a living thing. And the beautiful thing is something that is still self-created. I found that really interesting. And I also like right before that ending, I totally agree about the interaction between her and Bush. but we have that even now the voice of Agnes floats toward me. I hear her say, once the world was covered in water. We have once again a kind of reference back to, these very canonical Western kind of like creation myths and some of these other myths with beaver that are introduced earlier. But at the same time, it goes on to talk about how it says, I hear her say that a human is alive water, that creation is not yet over, right? And I would say that the end, in a way, kind of resists the idea of endings in the same way it resists beginnings, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that way, that time is, there's something cyclical happening. I'm not saying it's a stuck circle; it could be a spiral, right? But there's this sense of, on to the next thing. This isn't necessarily over, right? And she's not done becoming whoever she's going to be, right? She's still growing. So
from a history standpoint, I love that they win in court, but after only all the damage is done. Like that is so accurate
totally.
to the way these things typically go. Is the court says, you know what, you're absolutely right. Well, too late. I mean, it's all destroyed and everything else.
Yeah.
It's really a nice, symbolic victory, but that's kind of all you get. So in that sense, I think she stayed pretty true. I think it would not have made much sense if they had been able to stop it. And in fact, I think Hogan does. And almost I was a little annoyed with this is that through most of this it feels very inevitable. It feels very like everything they're doing is pointless, and maybe that's just my historical knowledge knowing that there's no way this ends well. But yeah, and so
Yeah.
it is kind of a nice historically true, accurate ending. And for those of you that are listening to this, yes, by the way, this I don't know if this specific thing happened, but these kinds of things happened in Canada and in the U.S. Um, where they just kind of built these reservoirs and they flooded native lands, and they really didn't care who they were displacing, and etc. So yes, this is very accurate to history of the 20th century. That's the other thing. This was going on in the 60s and 70s. So, all right, so that brings us to our final student question. This one comes from a student in Frisco. So, and this really does kind of include the entire novel, which is why I waited to do this one here, is how different is Angela really at the end? How did she
Okay.
change? And so this is where we get into that kind of theme that's, by the way, in the guides, for those of you reading the guides, about healing and self-discovery. But how much does Angela really change throughout this entire book, which obviously, going back to our discussion about a Bildungsroman last time, is kind of the core of a coming of age, that you should significantly grow up or change at some point. So your thoughts on how Angela changed kind of from beginning to end through the book?
That modifier really throws some skepticism in that question for me. I can't help but
Yeah.
hear, did she really? Did she? I think it's a fair question. I also, I think something about the narrative voice and its distance, the way the story is told. I could see someone maybe thinking, oh, she didn't really change that much. But when we see her acting on the page, it is very different than the voice that's sometimes recollecting what has occurred, right?
Yes.
And as we've already spoken of, I mean, it's not like she's done growing, right? The realization itself is something, I think.
Yeah.
It's hard to change yourself, right? We don't have to get too philosophical, but events are, can empower or destroy us. They can redirect us. And she certainly isn't the girl that showed up at Adam's Rib at the beginning. I don't see that.
There's at least a better understanding of her community and the world she came from. I think if you're being very highly critical of how much she changed, is whoever asked this question was, you have to at least admit that she is far more knowledgeable about where she came from and what she's a part of than in the beginning.
She can definitely draw plants.
Yes, I mean that is, and understanding the meaning and understanding some of the rituals that come with that. I think gives you a kind of conception of where you come from, which I think this entire book is about rediscovering who you are through who you come from or people you come from. So yeah, Yosri, your thoughts on how Angela, did she really change? Was the
Did she
tenor
really
of the
change?
question?
I think I've never encountered a character who talked about how much she's changed more than Angela. She talks about how she's changed
Yes.
so
Yeah.
many times.
She's
Um,
still changing.
and
Yeah.
she's still changing. I think,
Yeah.
yes, in the many ways where the many ways in which she thinks she's changed, she did, we
Yeah.
can see it. But in case we've missed it, she is also explaining to us that she's changed. Uh, but I think that the main thing in the end that's maybe different from the other things that happen, or the other, type of growth that happens in the book, is that in the end she seems to be less restless and she seems to be settled.
Yeah, that's
Seems
true.
to have found some kind of a sense of peace. She is still growing, she's still learning from the women around her, but it doesn't feel anymore that movement is central, like physical movement is central to the process of learning the way it did in the beginning or throughout the book.
Yeah. And she also, like, she definitely seems more positive, maybe, with the
Yes.
beautiful
Yeah.
animals. And not only that, but, if we just look at the words on the page, right? The sentences, you will see, just believe it, you will see. These are, I mean, these are commands, right? She has adopted an imperative voice. That's a
Yeah.
very empowered stance to take, right? She is now directing you, the reader, and that's not just semantics, right?
Yeah. No, she was not directive at all at the beginning. She's very just kind of everything kind of was just washing over her, and like things happened to her rather than her doing things. So yeah,
I have a
she
feeling,
was physically being moved around places like she had no control over that. So yeah.
and
Well,
even
great.
by the end of the novel, just like she was the way she was coming back to like take care of Bush or find Bush,
Yeah.
right, and to Post Town and stuff. I have a feeling she'll be mothering Bush someday soon too.
Yes, much like Agnes did with Dora Rouge. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because continuing in traditions of
Right.
the women in her family. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of episode 3 of our Summer Lit podcast. I want to thank JS and Yosra for being a part of this entire series and diving into this book through the summer and talking about it with me. We hope everyone listening has enjoyed our discussions and that this helps you as you prepare with your team to get ready for district in probably November, December, or region in January. Whenever you're listening to this, we hope this has been helpful for you to prepare for academic decathlon. So good luck to everyone this season. Thank you again, JS and Yosra. And this series will be back next summer when we have a new novel. So hope everyone has a great academic season.
Thanks, Jared. It was really fun.
Come alive. New and old tales we revive. Voices distant yet so near. In every sentence we hear. Plot twists and tales untold. Heroes brave and hearts of gold. Every book a treasure chest. In each one we find our quest. Every chapter a new friend. In our story there's no end. Lost in words a world unfolds. Let's get ready.